Hello, I am Filippo Santoni De Sio from the 4TU Center for Ethics and Technology. Today I'm here with Michael Nagenborg for an interview with him. We are at the Robophilosophy Conference 2016, and we want to hear from Michael Nagenborg about his work. First of all, Michael, can you please introduce yourself? What's your role at the 4TU?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Michael Nagenborg. I'm an assistant professor for philosophy of technology at the University of Twente. I also happen to be the managing director of 4TU. And I'm happy to be here to talk about urban robotics.
That's right. So we're going to have this workshop on responsible robotics, and you will be presenting something at this workshop. Can you anticipate something about what you will be talking about in this workshop?
Well, my principal interest at the moment is on the interplay between technologies and cities. So I call this kind of technologies urban technologies in the sense that they are both shaping city life and at the same time are shaped by city life. Mm-hmm. And urban robotics, as I would frame it, is part of urban robotics, urban technologies. So I'm interested in the robots that will be walking in the streets, for example.
Yeah, so this is very interesting because it goes a bit against the common conception of what a robot is. We tend to think of robots like humanoids, agents, whereas you seem to be interested in less visible forms of robotics. Is that part of your story?
That is part of my story, but I'm also interested in visible robots. So that is how I got into this overall idea. So if we look, for example, in the realm of care robots, so we have mobility aids, so robots that will help people to walk. But the problem is these robots have wheels. So the whole idea of promoting independent living ends at the first flight of stairs. Yeah. So at that time, when I first discovered this kind of contradiction, I thought, okay, here's the problem. Do we want to design cities for robots or robots for cities? Mm-hmm. And that then gradually evolved towards the question, okay, how can we arrange these spatial objects that robots are? And that is really what interests me about robots, that they are spatial objects that are somewhere, that take some space, that need to be somewhere. That's right. And how will that affect the way that we build houses, how we build streets, how we build cities?
Yeah. So the idea is that it doesn't make sense to focus on the design of individual robots if we don't reflect on the interaction between the robots and the environment.
Exactly. And that is also where then the invisible aspects come in. Yeah. So, for example, one thing I will highlight in my talk is the dependency of robots on invisible infrastructures. So how will they be connected to the overall ecosystem of a city? I'm really surprised that we haven't seen more work being done in the intersection of smart cities and robots, for example. Right. Because on the one hand, smart cities is all about sensoring. Robots are sensors on wheels or that are flying around. So it makes, to me, it looks very obvious that you can make that connection. Yeah. On the other hand, robots rely on information about the environment. And again, smart city environments can provide them with this kind of information.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was wondering if your sensitivity to this interdependency between robots and infrastructures has to do with your story, your academic story. You have been interested both in cities and in robotics, and so maybe that's why you are particularly sensitive to this interaction.
I think so, and what also contributes to this is my general interest in information infrastructures. So since I did my PhD on privacy and then I worked for a good while on surveillance technologies, so I'm pretty much aware about the role of information infrastructure in our society. And that obviously gives me a good angle to deal with this issue. Another topic that I always have been concerned with is justice. Right. And I think if we talk about urban robotics, we must also talk about urban policing, or we must talk about urban transport systems that might enable or disable access to work or to education, for example.
Yeah. So you just mentioned some very sensitive ethical topics. May I ask you to elaborate a bit on that? So what do you see as the most pressing ethical issues in the design of these urban robots?
I think there is an overall challenge that we need to have a discussion about what cities should look like. So we need to have an idea about good citizens and good cities. So how can we come up with an idea of an environment where we would like to live in, and how will that environment go back to us and shapes our discussions around what we would like to be. And that is crucially missing. So if we look at the literature on smart cities, we have a strong secretarial approach. So there are people working on improving the transportation system. There are people working on improving environmental aspects. There are people working on improving government's ongoings, like policing, but also about decision-making processes.
Yeah.
But we hardly ever see projects addressing this overall question about how can we bring this all together.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly interested here in, let's call it the spillover effects. So what might look like a good idea in the beginning to solve an issue in a particular sector might have negative consequences on the other side.
Right. So, and do you think that in this sense, because what you say made me think that, you know, the idea of value-sensitive design in this case should be quite helpful because it's about anticipating the possible effects. But now you mentioned these difficulties of really anticipating all these systemic effects. So
exactly, yeah.
Who can have the capacity and the responsibility to kind of, if anyone, to supervise this sort of anticipatory work?
It's tricky because even if you just look at the built environment as it is now, without smart technologies, robots running around and so on, there's always a feeling of we losing control over the development. Right. So traditional strategies in urban planning no longer work. So the question is, what can we do in order to manage cities, even in the absence of technologies? And my particular approach actually goes in the direction of value-sensitive design by asking people to design technologies for cities, or what I would call cityness as a value, to promote the desirable qualities of city life as an overarching goal in value-sensitive design. How to do that in detail, I don't know yet.
That's right.
But the overall idea is that we need to be context aware, not only for the specific sector that we are working in, but also for the overarching context of the city. Yeah. And I think there are some good work that is already done in the philosophy of the city, focusing on interconnections, intersections, facilitating of bringing people together, allowing to perceive the city as a whole and so on, that can be part of this overall goal to promote cityness by technologies.
So we both, maybe last question, we both work in the Netherlands, we are now in Denmark. So maybe question would be, do you have the feeling that there is one country in Europe or outside Europe where this sensitivity for ethical redesign of cities is more present?
Actually, it's a hard and tough choice between Denmark and Netherlands because I think they are outstanding. Okay. Germany is also doing a quite well job. And that is maybe a positive effect about smart cities. So in the beginning, it was a very technological-driven vision. Let's do that. Let's have a lot of sensors and so on and so on. And now there's almost an overarching consensus in people who are interested in this kind of technologies to say, this is not enough. We need to think about how we can make responsible innovations for the cities. And now we started this discussion, which we should have had earlier on, about desirable qualities of city lives, livable cities, walkable cities, and so on, which I think is a good starting point, and I hope that happens not only in Denmark and the Netherlands.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.